In this video, we're going to talk about solving systems of equations by the elimination method. We're going to start with just exploring what is elimination. It's the process of eliminating either the x term or the y term from both equations, and this allows us to solve for one variable at a time. We're going to use a flow map to talk about each step involved in this process. So typically you will be presented with a word problem. And if you have a word problem, you have to first create your equations. But before you can create equations, you have to determine your x variable and your y variable. The first step is to read the problem and define the variables. In other words, what is x and what is y? Let's look at this example together. The math club sells candy bars and drinks during football games. 60 candy bars and 110 drinks will sell for $265. 120 candy bars and 90 drinks will sell for $270. How much does each candy bar sell for? If we read this problem again, let's consider what we know and what we don't know. What we do know is how many candy bars and how many drinks have been sold. What we don't know is how much a candy bar costs or how much a drink costs. We will let x be the price of one candy bar. We will let y be the price of one drink. The second step is to write two equations, one equation for each scenario. We will have an equation for the first scenario, and we'll have an equation for the second scenario. After we have our two equations, we want to make the coefficients match for either the x term or the y term by multiplying one or both of those equations. We'll start with writing our two equations. 60 times the price of a candy bar plus 110 times the price of a drink is a total of $265. Next, 120 times the price of a candy bar plus 90 times the price of a drink is a total of $270. This is our system of equations. Notice that for both of these equations, we have an x term plus a y term is equal to a number. This is called standard form. Elimination only works when your two equations are both in standard form. Now we need to make either the coefficients for the x terms match, or we need to make the coefficients for the y terms match. When I look at these coefficients, I see that 60 and 120 can easily be made to be the same number if I multiply 60 times 2. So since we want to multiply 60 times 2 to make it be 120, we have to carry out that process to every term in that equation. So I'm going to multiply each term in this equation times 2 using the distribution method. 60 times 2 is 120. 110 times 2 is 220. And 265 times 2 is 530. Now, since my x term matches my x term for the second equation, I'm simply going to rewrite the second equation below it. Now, with them lined up, I can see very clearly that my x terms have the same coefficient of 120. I'm going to rewrite our two equations. Since our x terms have matching coefficients, we need to determine if we should add them or if we should subtract them so that they become 0. If I were to add 120 plus 120, that would give me 240x. That's not what we want. What we do want is to subtract 120 minus 120 so that that becomes 0x. If you have 0 times x, that's simply 0, so we don't need to write anything at all. We can simply cross it out. Then we continue to subtract straight down. Since I subtracted here, I also have to subtract here and here. 220 minus 90 is equal to 130. And 530 minus 270 is equal to 260. Notice that I no longer have an x term in the equation. I only have a y term. This is exactly what we want. We have eliminated the x term. Now that we have an equation with just one variable, we can solve to find what that variable is. To solve for y, I simply need to divide by 130 on both sides to isolate the y variable. 130 divided by 130 is 1. So 1y is equal to 260 divided by 130, which is 2. This tells us since y was the price of one drink, that means that each drink costs $2. The question asked us to find the cost for each candy bar. So the final step to solving this system of equations by elimination is to take our solution, plug it in for that variable, and find the value of the second variable. We can take either the first equation or the second equation and plug in 2 for the y variable. I will take the first equation and substitute 2 where the y variable is. One 110 times 2 is 220. When we solve this equation, we get x equals 0.75. Since x was the price of one candy bar, that tells us each candy bar is 75 cents.